Okay, now we can actually look at those steps up top because we're solving by factoring. Before we even look at the steps, if you look at most of these, especially this one here, if I cover up the 0, this looks like chapter 8. We're going to find a way to factor this multiply and add method, greatest common factor, perfect square trinomial. Guess what? All of that is showing back up. First step is to get it in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This plus and plus are probably going to end up being minuses in some cases. The important thing is that this is equal to 0. The other thing is make sure the leading coefficient is positive. That just means make sure your first number is positive. It's the same thing when we were doing factoring in chapter 8. This makes it easier to factor. This is the new thing that we're adding with that 0 property from earlier. So this first problem, I'm going to let you know just off the bat, this is a multiply and add method, and I'll show you why. This is in the correct form. This is a positive 1. This is equal to 0. I've got my other terms here. It's not a greatest common factor. There's no greatest common factor here. They don't have something in common. It's not a perfect square trinomial because 55 is not a perfect square. It's not a difference of squares because there's 3 terms. Remember, a difference of squares has 2 terms. And it's not a box method because box method means that this number is something bigger than 1. So I can do multiply and add method for this. So the way that you would do multiply and add method for this kind of problem is you're looking for a number that multiplies to negative 55 and is going to add to positive 6. So when you go through and solve this one, it looks like you're going to be using positive 11 and negative 5. Those two answers here and here, if you remember from last chapter, my answer would just be x plus 11, x minus 5, and I would be done. It would look something like this. And I would be finished. I could FOIL this and work back to this and be fine. Here's what's new. I have this equal 0. I want to make this equal 0. Now, this looks exactly like what we did here. Instead of this being my final answer, I want to set both of these equal to 0. So I'm going to draw my line like I did up here. I'm going to have x plus 11 is equal to 0, and x minus 5 is equal to 0. When I move this over, and I move this over, here it becomes negative 11. Here it becomes positive 5. If you notice, pretty much every time you do this, you're just going to have the opposite sign. Started with positive 11, ended with negative. Started with negative 5, ended with positive 5. Same thing up here, negative 2 to positive 2, positive 5 to negative 5. When you have these multiple step problems, it can get a little tricky. The nice thing is that unless you're working with something very complicated like a box method problem, this really won't show up down here. This is how you would do a multiply and add method though. I'm going to stick to doing just one of these per problem, per method. That way you're not overloaded with stuff and you can always ask me questions.